Welcome to In Session by Westside Children's Therapy, the podcast about the real work of pediatric therapy and the tools that help kids find their voice. Whether you're a parent, caregiver, therapist, this is the space where real conversations happen. Each week we sit in session with experts in the field to talk about the work, the wins, the challenges, and the science behind helping kids meet their full potential. I'm your host, Marika Kackett, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started. We're in session. Welcome back to In Session, the pediatric therapy podcast brought to you by Westside Children's Therapy. Today we're tackling a topic that gets pretty heated at the dinner table: picky eating and feeding disorders. Upwards of 50% of children have some sort of feeding or eating disorder, and that percentage can get as high as 80% for children with other comorbidities. So I'm really excited to show and introduce our panel of guests. We have Kristalyn Turner, we have Rebecca Lonkar, and Mary Smyers. Smyers. We have to laugh. Welcome to Westside. We always laugh. So thank you, ladies, for joining us. Talk about picky eating. So, for picky eating, one, it's a part of speech, correct? Mm-hmm. 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 So a lot of people don't realize that you are all speech therapists. Are you also dietitians, or how do you how does someone work in speech therapy but also specialize in feeding disorders?
So first, our feeding team at Westside, we have speech therapists and occupational therapists. And it's more of a secondary discipline than you add on. But by nature, you are a speech therapist or an occupational therapist. But it does fall within our scope of practice. So a lot of therapists, like you have your base, and then you kind of build off those skills in the areas of sensory-based feeding, which would be kind of that picky eating side, oral motor, which is actual skills of eating. And we kind of like bridge that gap for those kiddos. We work with dietitians and we have like background knowledge, but we don't make dietary recommendations. We more of are about exposure and building the skills of eating and the relationship with food, not really telling them like they have to eat this many calories a day. That is more of like a dietitian nutritionist, which we work very closely with, but that is not something we do in our sessions.
And I think one of the things that I want to make clear is what's the difference between, a picky eater, an eating disorder, and a feeding disorder? Is there, because I think those words get thrown around a lot. So if a parent thinks my child has an eating disorder, they might think of bulimia or anorexia, but you all are talking about something very different. So kind of guide us into how the terms are used correctly in this discipline.
Yeah, absolutely. So what you're referring to, an eating disorder like bulimia or anorexia, that is definitely not something that we treat. At least the feeding therapists do not treat. We do have counselors on our teams. And so whether it's at Westside or a counselor somewhere else, that's going to be more of the psychological route. You're going to go with that. It's treated completely differently.
And so I think that's really important, because I don't know how many parents you come across think, well, I don't think my child is anorexic or bulimic, but I have a 4-year-old that will not eat carrots, or that, meal times are so hard. So, I think, in the stats tell us that sometimes up to 80% of children can have some sort of feeding disorder. So, and I know, Mary, you did a lot of research on this. So can you kind of give us an insight of, what the numbers say and what does that mean?
Yeah, so there's over 56% of kids who experience picky eating, and it can range up to 85%. It's more prevalent in other comorbid diagnoses, such as like autism or ADHD. And sometimes it also has to do with medication, because sometimes the medication that children are on actually suppresses their appetite and they're not as hungry. So with that picky eating, we're looking at a variety of things. So when we think of picky eating, how many foods are you eating? And for us, we are really trying to get above 30 to 40 foods. Like, that's kind of our goal, because otherwise they're kind of like our problem feeders, our medical feeders. They're not getting enough, nutrition in their body. But we do come across a lot of parents who are like, hey, my kid's not eating carrots. But I'm like, what fruits are they eating? They're like, oh, they eat like 20, 30 fruits. I'm like, well, then you're good. You got those nutrients other places. It's just that exposure, because fruits are sweet and veggies are not. And I think we all struggle with not loving vegetables to its full potential. So,
yeah, I think the other part of that too is What does your like home life mealtime routines look like? Because I have definitely, taken kids on for feeding therapy just due to the stress and the anxiety that is around mealtime. The way that they react when new foods are presented or requested to, for them to try. Sometimes that's running away, hiding under the table, crying, sobbing, saying their stomach hurts, they're not hungry anymore. All of that anxiety pulls into that. And so that's really something that we can work on with the family. And in that case, we're maybe not really working on expanding their food repertoire, but we're working on those like emotions and mealtime routines and how to make that a positive experience.
Or like the communication around mealtimes and food. And that's what a lot of it is like, how can we communicate about this in a comfortable way so it's less stressful for everybody?
So you have some kids that will literally eat anything you put in front of them, and you have some kids that are picky. How is that a personality thing? I mean, how do these, feeding disorders develop?
I think it's a combination of everything. Like some of it's taste. How does it taste? Sometimes it's texture. Sometimes it comes from that oral motor piece where a kid is chewing and chewing and chewing this food, and now it doesn't have a taste and it feels gross. Some of it's environmental. Some of it's how parents approach the situation. Sometimes it's how do we set up mealtime as a whole. There's so many, barriers that go into feeding that we have to kind of sit there and, like Becky said before, take it like a puzzle and kind of break it down to kind of put it all together to figure out how we can make all of mealtime successful and what's really impacting the child.
So I feel like you have the sort of like the sensory, eating like texture, smell on one side, and then you have center on one side, and then you have maybe more behavior on the other. So how do you navigate and be able to sort of diagnose and help a child who maybe is more a difficult eater because of sensory, or now it's maybe a behavioral issue?
So I think with that, we have like a very nice diagram, but we have a handout for parents, and basically every aspect is always present. So it could be sensory, oral, motor, and behavioral, and they all overlap, and they're all there in every picky eater. But when you sit down and initially see them, is it they have really bad skills of eating, like chewing's really poor, their mastication, or like they don't lateralize their tongue, they don't really form a bolus, they're kind of spitting it out. Well, like Mary said, say a piece of chewy steak. Hate to give that example, I love steak too, but you're chewing it and chewing it and chewing it, but you have a weak chew. Well, now the sensory response is it's gross and it feels weird in my mouth. The behavior is you spit it out. This vicious cycle goes over and over and over again, where all three are typically present, but it depends on which one we need to tackle first. Like, do I need to work on the behaviors because we spit everything out now and be like, okay, why are we doing that? Or do I have to work on the skills to make their chew stronger? Or is it the sensory that now so much like I can't do anything chewy? Where's our jumping off point? But all three are always present in every picky eater.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example, because I think also what you're saying is that anytime kids have behavior, it's communication, right? So in that example, they're communicating with you that they're having a hard time chewing it. And they'll communicate all kinds of different things, but we really have to dive into and see like, how do we address that behavior? Because it typically is not going to be through any kind of consequence or punishment or anything like that. We have to figure out like, why is it happening? What are they trying to tell us? And then how do we address that? Is it that they're dysregulated? Is it that they're having trouble chewing? Is it that food was too strong, or it needs to be a smaller piece? I mean, there's so many things that could be. So we really have to dive in and investigate and figure that out. And that's how you kind of like close that circle.
And, for a parent who, some of us were raised where if you don't eat it, you're not, if you don't eat what I put in front of you, you're going to bed hungry. It's obviously very, very different now, but when should a parent feel like, okay, maybe there's a red flag? Mary mentioned, well, my kid's not eating carrots, but they eat 5,000 fruits. So they're getting the right vitamin C. But where should some behaviors begin to be a red flag where they need to come and consult feeding experts at Westside?
I think it also just depends on the family and the kids. So some of our kids, I've seen even up to 5 years old, they're not even chewing or swallowing any food. They're only eating puree. And families have come to me at 2 years going, I think this is a red flag. And I'm like, you're right, it is a red flag. I've had some kids who start eating everything up until the age of 2. And once they kind of hit that 2 phase where they have more words and they can communicate more, they're like, no, if I can get chicken nuggets, I want chicken nuggets from McDonald's. And as a therapist, we kind of look at all those different avenues. So I think my big, warning signs for eating is if your kid has under 30 foods. I feel like that's just a general warning sign. If they aren't open to trying new foods, if mealtime is stressful at home and your child's having a hard time and you're having a hard time, I don't want that for either of you, because mealtime should be enjoyable. It's like the most social time, and it's something you grow into and you go places and do all those things. So those are some of my big warning signs. I don't know if you guys have any other ones.
I would agree with that. I think the other thing I want to clarify too with the 30 foods is every food counts as one. Bread is one, peanut butter is one, a peanut butter sandwich is one. That's 3 foods. So because we change the texture, we change the flavor. So a lot of times when we dissect the diets of the kids that come in, because we do, granted, like I stated, we aren't nutritionists, we do dissect their diet to really see what can we pair off. Okay, I see that peanut butter's kind of soft. We like that, but we don't like yogurt. Okay, it's thicker. We try to dissect it that way in the sensory side. And that's why on our team, we have OTs too to help us with that sensory-based feeding too. I think so that's like a really good thing for parents to know is like, they're like, they don't eat a lot. And then I'm like, they have 50 foods. And they're like, well, I want them to eat the casserole. I'm like, I don't want to eat the casserole. So like, I always tell parents, I'm like, they're not going to like everything though. Just because you do doesn't mean they will. So you have to give them like credit where credit's due. It's just because you might like something doesn't mean they're going to like it too.
And how much of feeding too, sensory based, but also physiologically based? How many children do you see with, with lack of a better word, like cleft palates or actual like physiological issues that you work through with them?
Yeah, so I think you're talking about like structural abnormalities, but also just like difficulty swallowing. Sometimes, a lot of times, it's just weakness. I think that's probably like the most common, thing that we see, whether you have a primary diagnosis or not. Sometimes it can just be due to lack of like eating and exposure and not chewing and swallowing for any period of time. Other medical things, obviously, if you have, a cleft palate or cleft lip, that, feeds into it. And sometimes because maybe you went a period of time not eating by mouth, maybe you previously had an NG tube or a G tube for a period of time, and now you're just starting to eat. So all of those things play into it. And what was the original question to be?
So just thinking about, I think it's interesting that like a lot of, parents might not realize. So I know certainly like Becky, you've talked about in the past about doing breastfeeding and having like lactation specialists for children that like can't latch on for babies and having issues latching on. But then you get a little older and then there's actual like physiological developmental issues within the throat or the mouth or the tongue that prevents feeding.
So that sometimes falls on our medical side of feeding. And I think we only break it up like for us mentally. So like you kind of have your medical feeders, which is more like that structural. If it is a cleft palate or lip, if they have dysphagia, which is an impairment in the swallowing process and any of the 4 or 5, depending on how you learned it, stages of swallowing. So that kind of falls in that category, but that can couple with that picky eating because if they don't have the skills, they're not going to be able to do it. So what they're going to do is the skills they have, they might make compensations, but they're going to get by with the skills they have, but it can create that picky eating environment because they just don't have the skills to eat higher level foods. And that's what we see a lot of times is it is a skill-based that's causing the sensory response that causes the behavior. So like that would be a kiddo that maybe they're chewing for a long time or like they go to swallow big bites and it like is uncomfortable, but it's maybe they've had purees for like 3 years and they're not used to it. I always tell parents too, feeding is under the first like 28 days, it's reflexive. We are born with the reflexes, pre-feeding reflexes to eat. If you don't integrate them into a motor plan, you lose them. So now we have to go back and like regain them. And that can take a very long time. So that's why we try to stay on feeding milestones the best we can because what we're doing with that, and it's not to be like, wow, my 6-month-old is eating a piece of pizza. That's not it. That's not what we want. What we want is you to gain the skills to eat higher level foods. So that's why we push like the progression of food. We do it that way because we're gaining the skills along with, yes, we want to advance your repertoire. We want you to have all these different exposures and all this stuff and communicate about it. But there is a reason for that.
Where on the sort of spectrum where you say, well, my kid's a picky eater, it's fine. Now my kid's a problem feeder. How do you differentiate the two?
I mean, I think Mary really went over that pretty in depth earlier, but I think it's going to be like where you start to see those changes, so like maybe you're like, oh, like I'm not really looking forward to dinner. It's usually a little bit rough versus like I dread having dinner because I know that my kid is going to be crying. They're going to be screaming. Someone's going to be yelling.
It's like a full meltdown.
It's a full meltdown. Yeah. And it's just every time you have dinner, it's turning into a disaster unless you go to McDonald's, and you're going to see them start to lose foods and never start eating them again. So, maybe they were eating 40 or 50 foods, but now they're only eating 30, and you try to cycle back to those other foods and they become just as upset as they do every night at dinner, and it becomes a huge, huge battle. And if you as a parent feel yourself in that power struggle when you are presenting foods and it's just not enjoyable for anyone, that's when it's time to get some help.
It's time to kind of escalate it. So if you have a child that that you're thinking about getting feeding therapy for, what are the initial steps? I mean, you don't just call Westside, you actually go through your medical, your doctor first. So kind of walk me through the steps that a parent would take if they are concerned that their child is not just a picky eater, but a problem feeder.
First, they would go to their pediatrician. They would talk to them. Some pediatricians screen pretty closely for that. Like I know my children, their pediatrician does, and like asks like, are we eating this many in this category, this many in this category? And again, with a grain of salt. Like I have kids, they eat completely different, and like one might eat 5 fruits and the other one eats 1. So it's like, do we have somewhat of a balance that you can at least get by? But they'll kind of talk that through. But I think the biggest thing is I think parents sometimes get really nervous about eating with their pediatrician because I feel like as a mom, like I was a mom, your like goal is to keep them alive, and that's to feed them. Mm-hmm. So sometimes when they're a little bit picky, you want to almost like pull back and be like, it's okay, we're gonna outgrow it. They don't want to, because they feel like bad, like it's their fault. Half times I'm like, it's not your fault. That's just innately who they are. They're not gonna like everything. Maybe they have some underlying sensory stuff. So I think having parents be like more honest about it with their pediatrician. We also screen a lot. Most of the time we'll get the screening form and I'm like, just schedule an email. Like we know where this is going to go, but we talk to parents on the phone sometimes too. So you can talk to your pediatrician. You can also schedule a free screening without a script first if you just want a little bit more advice and guidance on that as well.
And, there's sort of like a, not catchphrase, but I've seen a lot of people talk about RFID. And, what is RFID? And that seems to be a real sort of like buzzword going on that you hear a lot of parents talk about. Does my kid have RFID? Explain to me, how there are different types of feeding disorders and in terms of severity where RFID comes in versus maybe some other picky eating diagnoses.
Yeah, I'll start and then I'll let you guys join in too. So first of all, it stands for Avoidant Restricted Food Intake Disorder. And it is an actual diagnosis that is in the DSM-5 now, I believe. Mm-hmm. We're on 5. So it's in there. And that is, you need that diagnosis to happen in consultation with a psychologist or psychiatrist. So that's not something we do completely on our own. We're typically working with a counselor if we feel we have someone that has that diagnosis. And a lot of times we get that on a script and that's really not what it is. Might just be that they're, a problem feeder. But there is a significant anxiety component that goes along with food and food specifically. It could be anxiety in general, but it's also going to be specifically related to food. And the easiest way I think or simplest way to describe it is just those kids that they really want to eat, but they physically cannot. Like they're like, I really want to try this pizza. And they're going to sit down at the table and they're like, I can't do it. I can't take a bite of it. I can't do it. And those are the kids who are going to be like, my stomach is hurting now. I'm not hungry, because that anxiety kicks in and now they're physically feeling unwell.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think with RFID, the biggest separation that we always see it is we do see it and hear it a lot now. And our job is to really dissect, is it true RFID? Because if it's true RFID, that psychological piece has to be present. And other picky eaters, yes, they might be nervous about food or anxious, but with a child with true RFID, it is a total shutdown. Like they want to do it so bad. Mm-hmm. And as soon as they try, it's like, I absolutely can't. And it's not that they don't want to eat either. And I think that's the thing sometimes that parents are like, I just don't think they want to eat it. The hard part with that is that they really do. They just can't bring themselves to do it. So it's like an actual fear of food. Mm-hmm. So it's scary for them. But it's not that they're like trying to have a behavior just like get out of eating because you want a McDonald's chicken nuggets and you have the Dino Nuggets from Tyson. It's like, that's not what I wanted. It's not that. It's a very, very more like a psychological piece. Like they want to so bad, but they just can't do it. So I always say it's more like the fear of food.
Yeah. And one of the things I thought was interesting too was, I mean, there are so many, you know, when you have problem feeders and you have children with some sort of feeding disorder, and a parent says, well, I want to get them feeding therapy, but what does that actually look like? I mean, what happened? I mean, I know this is a very like loaded, wide question, but so if someone's coming in and whether maybe not ARFID, but if they have a feeding disorder, what is a therapy session for a feeding? What does feeding therapy look like?
So for our feeding therapy session, our speech side is 45 minutes, where our occupational therapy side is 60 minutes. So it kind of also depends on who you're getting. But usually how, at least I start my sessions, and maybe we all do it a little bit differently too, is we set the table together. We get the table ready, and I'm sitting there with 2 plates for every kid. One of my kid likes 3 because we have to have a yes plate, a no thank you plate, and maybe that's cool plate. And I love their personalities and how they come up. So we set out the table, we wash our hands, we get ready, and we pull out different foods. Now, some of my friends who are a little bit more sensory seeking, we're going to do jumping jacks to start. We're going to do leapfrogs. We're going to do wall push-ups. And I'm pretty sure our counselor next door thinks we're breaking down the wall, but we're not. And we get our bodies ready to eat, because if we're not calm and regulated, we're really not going to get anywhere. Some of my kids that are more sensory seekers, we are diving into like bean bins, rice bins, food bins. Some of my sessions is all play with food, and we take yogurt and we're making different faces in the yogurt, and we're saying, this is my happy face and this is my sad face. And then we start giving them little fruit snacks and they're crying, and just getting them enticed. Because if we can play with food and it's positive about food, we're going to eat the food. And then some of my older kids who are a little bit more understanding and they're more willing to try the steps to eating, we'll take more of a structured approach where they can smell it, taste it, do different size bites with it, but not an elephant bite, because that would be too big.
Yeah. I think getting them prepared, but then also the biggest thing that I want to add to your like food play is that a lot of parents will be like, you're just playing with food. Just how when we talked about speech, like you're just playing with my kid. Well, really though, if they won't touch it on their hands, which is furthest away from their core, we protect our core. That's just human nature. The way it feels on their hands is the way it feels in your mouth. And the reason for that is you have same kind and number of receptors on your hands as in your mouth. So if you touch a piece of steak with your eyes closed, touching it, that's going to be sensory, taking out the smell, all that, the taste, it's going to feel the same in your mouth. So if they're not going to play with it, they're not just going to magically put it in their mouth. And I think that's why sometimes parents, we break down that wall of like, they're like, oh, they're playing with their food now. I don't want them. Don't play with your food. That whole back to like, eat what I gave you. Don't play with your food. And we're like, oh no, we're going to maybe paint the walls, drop it on the ground, paint our face. I don't know. It's going everywhere, because if they won't touch it here. You're not building trust with anything, because they're never going to get it to their most sacred place, which is their core.
And I mean, so play with your food.
Yes. Play with your food.
Absolutely. At Westside, we play with our food.
We play with our food.
And I think what's really cool is that, again, like you're having to relearn about food. You're understanding the relationship with food, like how you communicate. And I had no idea that how you touch is how it feels in your mouth. So when you're thinking about someone, you know, that you're playing with yogurt, or if they don't like the feel on their hands, why would they like it in their mouth?
Yeah, they're not just going to do it. Yeah.
So how then can you have a parent, you know, helping with at home? What can parents do to sort of encourage kids to enjoy meal times, play with their food, support their therapy?
Yeah, so I think encouraging that play, you know, like we're always playing with a purpose, right? And I think doing the same thing at home. I think the biggest thing at home for any kid who's having difficulty with eating is exposure.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest things that you can do is involve your kids in meal times. It could just be setting the table at first. It could be cutting up the, you know, vegetables or fruits, making smoothies together. You know, when they get a little bit older, actually letting them cook, showing them how to use the microwave, how to make their own food and their own snacks, how to open things. All of that is like not only is it an important life skill, but it's such a natural way to involve your kids and to expose them to different foods. So maybe you're still going to make them something different for dinner, but they've now like touched, smelled, and been involved in everything that's going to go into dinner. I think that's one of the easiest things. And if you're going to incorporate something additional, you can pick a time during the day where you have, 10 or 20 minutes and just get out some different foods and play and have a snack with them. And I also think eating with your kids is big too, because I think sometimes we just we make our kids something, we're like, okay, here you go. And I'm still busy and I'm doing this, or I'm checking my emails, and really just having that meal time with your kids. So maybe it's just you and your kid, maybe it's the whole family, but really taking that time to just talk to your kids. And even if they're not talking yet, just tell them about your day and start to develop that structure of what a mealtime should look like.
I mean, it's communication.
Yeah.
It's just another form of communication. So, so maybe, there are things that parents might not be, they're not knowingly, they're not eating with their kids and they really, so what are some behaviors that maybe parents are unwittingly knowing that they're unknowingly doing to harm or, distract kids from eating?
Well, the first, my parent advice first always is dinner is the hardest meal of the day. Mm-hmm. And that's the meal everyone's typically together for. So that's kind of a parent shocker where they're well, that's when I want them to do this. It's not happening right now. So I tell them, I'm make dinner the easiest. Give them their preferreds for that, but still eat with them. Mm-hmm. Because the reason it's the hardest is if mom and dad both work, they might be in school. They might have went to daycare after school, or maybe they're in daycare all day. Maybe there are older kids and they're going from school to sports to homework. They are burnt out. They're on sensory. They are tired. They're going to gravitate towards something to calm them down that is safe. So that is a meal that I always say, that is not your meal you're going to go changing. That's the last meal that's ever going to change. But that's the meal you need to make count in a way of communication around food and comfort around food. So even if you're making them something different, still engage with what Kristalyn said, having them make it with you. You can have a no thank you plate of I made this, can we at least put it on your plate? But that's going to be your hardest meal to change. So that's something I always start number one. And that's normally the buzz of parents what? I'm we're just going to make it easier on you, because that's one of the most stressful meals. And our goal is what does it look like at home? What can we make easier for you and make easier for them? So I would say that's my biggest thing that I always tell parents is that's going to be the last one you're ever going to change. Do not make it hard for yourself.
Yeah. And just on to that too, is we're very stuck, I think, sometimes in this is what I eat for breakfast. This is what I eat for lunch. This is what is an acceptable dinner. And you really need to throw all of that out. And you can save your leftovers and then do them with your kid the next day at breakfast. That's going to be their best meal. They're we all know they wake up earlier than we want them to, and they're ready to go at 6 a.m., even if we are not. And so that's Becky's saying, that's going to be your easiest meal. And so introducing some of those newer or non-preferred foods, it's going to be easier to do that at breakfast time or lunchtime or a snack versus trying to do it at dinner. And who cares if you're eating a hamburger for breakfast? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Food those are food. Social rules that someone made up at some point, but we don't have to follow them.
I mean, that's very true. I always tell parents with back to school season, I feel that's always hard because you're having to change your routine, your everything else. So I have encouraged my parents this week to do after school snack time, where we sit down, we talk about our day, we have all of our energy kind of going out, and we do different foods based off of different moods. And I've also given parents bingo cards and giving kids choices. And all my kids are so excited for their summer bingo this summer. They're I ate a hot dog, Miss Mary. And I was awesome. And then they're doing different things with it. So I think, everyone said, breakfast is probably the easiest time to do it. After school snack might be also a great time because you're kind of ready to eat. But just also meeting kids where they're at. Because the more you put stress on the meal, the more they're going to pull back. Because this is something that they can control. This is something that they have a choice about, where we're not setting their routine, setting their expectations. They pick what goes in their mouth. So we got to support them and be on their side.
And how do you support a parent who has a picky eater, but maybe has two other children that aren't? So you have that, how does that family dynamic come into play?
I would say usually siblings are so motivated to share food with their siblings and to talk about it. So usually what I have seen is siblings sharing food off each other's plate, siblings modeling different size bites, showing how to play with food. And usually if we're starting to let one food play explore, the other two are like, yes, I get to do it too. And we kind of break down those barriers to make everyone a part of the experience, which I feel like is so cool.
Yeah. I feel like as a mom, I lived that life because my son, everything happens for a reason. I learned so much. And from him, by nature, I'm a speech therapist and a feeding therapist. And then he was, of course, naturally, everyone's like, your kid probably eats everything. I'm like, opposite. Now he's a phenomenal eater, but it took us a long time to get there because I had to meet him where he was at. He was very sensory based and like things were hard nosed. And everyone's like, oh, I can't believe like he to this day, he will not eat pasta. And I think that will not do it. He will try it now, big win. But like, he's like, I still don't like it. It's again, how he said, they're not going to like everything. But for him, like I would always have a no thank you plate. I would still make his preferred foods, especially at dinner because like he's tired. My husband and I both work like, so it was one of those that I was like, I need to make this easy on him. Cause back to how we said before, I need to build trust around food and he needs to trust me with giving him something to eat that he knows is safe. If I don't build the trust, I can't manipulate his environment. Hence him to trust me enough to try something different and know that he's confident in me. Like I'm not going to give you something completely crazy. And then we can move on and grow from there. So you have to build the trust to manipulate the environment to make progress. So I think that's something that we're like, it's so easy to do, but sometimes in families we are very overwhelmed, but like we're really going to try to help give you the tools to make it as less stressful and easy as possible for your kids.
So it seems to me it's more harmful to pressure children to eat something they truly don't want to eat, and it causes stress at the mealtime, which if we said dinner really should be the easiest, not the hardest. So talk to me about how you would encourage parents to say, look, you don't have to eat, how parents, they feel like they need to pressure their kids to eat. Like my thing was, I hated sloppy joes. I still think they're disgusting. I've never eaten them. I've never liked them. I just remember being told you have to eat sloppy joes, and I just thought that was the grossest thing. I didn't want to eat them. But like now with kids, do you feel should parents say no, you need to eat something, or back off and say maybe we'll try something else?
I'm a big options person, like providing different options, providing different scenarios so that the kid can choose. I'm also a big way about how we use our words. Like if you come up to me and say, you better eat this steak, I'm going to laugh at you because steak is actually one of my least favorite foods. But if you, I know. But also if you're like, hey, why don't you either lick it or what do you smell it? Or maybe let's paint with it. I feel like it gives that opportunity to expand out, to be more engaged with the food.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes too, just like Mary said, like lots of options. Like here is everything that we're going to have for dinner tonight. I feel like if we could bring back the family meal where like you actually like pass around dishes and make your plate. I know that dirties a lot of dishes, and so our families don't always love to do that. But it's such a great opportunity for them to have an interaction with every food that you have on the table. And like Becky said earlier, you're always going to include something that your problem feeder or picky eater can fill up on. So maybe you're having, burgers and rice and I don't know, you're also going to have some carrots, right? Cooked carrots, and they're not going to eat any of those. So you also could make mac and cheese as a side if you know that they'll eat mac and cheese. And then, you're going to pass those bowls around and they're going to pick out how much they want to put on their plate. So everything goes on your plate, or maybe you also have a no thank you plate. So maybe just the mac and cheese is on the plate I'm eating off of. And then I'm going to put everything else. But then you're scooping it, you're putting it on your plate, you're interacting with it, and everyone is eating the same things, even if they don't eat it, so they get to have access to all of that. And it's an automatic just exposure, and it creates like a cohesive participation in mealtime without adding too much stress on anyone.
And it seems to me like, for parents, this no thank you plate. I've never heard of the idea of having this, and that might be a really great tool for families to have. So in addition to the no thank you plate, what are some other tools, if it's website, books, toys that you feel can really help encourage children in their feeding journey?
All right, I got two.
All right, well, you go
My first one is the silly straws. I love a good silly straw. It makes trying drinks more fun. It really works on, your oral motor skills and really strengthening those. Ever since Becky and Kristalyn introduced me at one of our CEUs to the super straws, all my kids come in and they're like, I want a super straw with my silly straw, because it really builds that oral pressure and it makes it fun and engaging. And they love watching it go all the way around.
What's a super straw?
You take a straw and then it's like, I use refrigerator, right? Like piping.
Yeah.
It sounds crazy.
A very, very just long
straw.
Get it at like the hardware store.
Yeah. And you put it together. And I had one kid want to drink their drink from all the way across the other side of the feeding room. And they thought it was the coolest thing. And it was a protein shake, which is great for getting another protein in, but that's how they did it. And that's another fun way to get involved. My other fun one is tasting spoons. I always, like at the ice cream shop where you get the little flavors, I love a good tasting spoon. And my kids also like to make music with them and see how their food flies. So, you know, it always makes it for a party.
Tasting spoons are great. I love toothpicks, or I love the like little forks for like seafood. A lot of kids like that because we could do like small little bites, stuff like that. I also like, again, the no thank you plate. We also have like little Dixie cups on the table that we call them bite and blows or blast off. So you could take a bite if they're okay with chewing it maybe, or not, of holding it in their mouth, and they spit it in a cup. Might seem gross or odd. However, again, we're throwing a lot of that out the window, of like the etiquette when we're eating. The reason we're doing that is because I'm allowing them to safely and appropriately a way to get it out of their body if they don't like it. They're trusting me enough that it's like, I'll do this for you. I can safely get it out. They're not like spinning it on the floor. They're not sitting at you staring like this. And they're like, can I spit it out yet? Can I spit it out yet? You know, and I'm like, no, like spit it in the cup. You're fine. So I think giving them tools, but all our tools are safe ways to get them to interact and engage with food that are comfortable for them. So they're not feeling like they have to have this huge behavior or this whole thing just for me to look at them and be like, oh, you really don't like that. You know, you're making them independent and, again, building the communication. Like they spit in the cup, they kind of like it. Maybe they don't, stuff like that. So it's a lot of tools like that.
Yeah. I think I have two as well. I think one, I love the like big handle, like kid safe knives. You can typically just get those on Amazon. Kids love to cut things up because in most households, they're not allowed to. And so if you find a way to involve them and give them a safe way to do it, they are obsessed with it. They will cut everything up and they will hold it and hold that in place while they chop it up, and they love that. I think the other really easy thing that probably everyone has at home is like a little makeup mirror. So putting a mirror on the table and letting the kids watch themselves eat. Sometimes it can be a little distracting, but they also love that. Kids love, like we're born loving to look at ourselves. Like we might not like it as adults, but when you're a child, you love to see yourself in the mirror. And so you can practice so many things in that mirror, like with your spoon, how big you're chewing, so many things.
The videos too are like a big winner. I feel like we're in the social media phase, and like we'll make a little video like in our therapy sessions. It's like, hi, I'm this. Today we're going to try. And I'm like, oh, you're like a little YouTube star going off. But they love doing that. And I've had it where I had one little girl, she took a bite and like saw it. She was like, oh my gosh, I just did it. And I was like, yeah, you did awesome. Like, and I'm like in the back, like, whoa, freaking out. But I didn't want to like, you know, go overboard. But she did it all by herself because I gave her a way that she felt comfortable to like express herself and explore the food.
Yeah, and I think, you know, being in the social media age, on Instagram, there's it's called Cooking with Cal, and he's this little boy from the UK. He has an adorable accent, and that kid has a repertoire. I mean, he's like a 5-star chef, and he loves to cook. And I mean, what a great thing to be able to show your kid, hey, like, and he just likes to make cooking videos, whether he's making a pie or pizza or picking strawberries with his family. So, you know, I think really for feeding, like anything else, it just comes down to communication and making it a good experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I always tell parents, like, you don't have to put so much pressure on yourself. Parents put so much pressure on themselves, and like, or you go on, you know, play dates with other moms and they're like, my kid eats this and mine. And you're like, oh God, my kid ate goldfish for breakfast. You know, don't do that. Don't live in the land of everybody else. Do what's best for you with your family in your, you know, what you have access to. Like, we're here to help, but like no guilt at all. Like, it's just, that's the biggest thing in the social media age on that is like, you know, everything's so in your face and you feel like you have to be perfect all the time. And that's not realistic. So parents, just don't beat yourself up over it. Like, we're here to help, but like we also understand where you're at.
And I think that's the thing about therapy, and that's the whole point of like this podcast being in session, is that we are meeting families where they're at. So thank you, ladies, for joining us. And parents, if you have any questions about feeding or disorders, you can always check out Westside Children's Therapy. And that was this session of In Session. We'll see you next week.